Hey everybody, I'm Asian Funk. Welcome back to my channel, and in this video I want to talk about how to not package your comics, like the wrong way.
Warning, the following video is for mature adult audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised.
Now if you're looking for a video on how to properly package your comics the right way, this is not the video for you. There are dozens and dozens of other videos on YouTube that properly cover how to package your comics. So go ahead and check those out. Now, what got me thinking about this was that I recently posted a photo on Instagram showing a comic I received that was packaged like this. That's a comic book wrapped in a plastic bag. I was not pleased. I was flooded with so many comments of similar experiences from other collectors of other poorly packaged comics that kind of inspired me to make this video. I mean, anyone can put a comic book in a cardboard box, right? That's 50% of the effort. I want to focus on the other 50%, which is how the comic book itself is packaged. And that's usually where sellers will cut corners and just be super lazy. I've experienced both ends of the spectrum. I've ordered Golden Age comic books from half across the world that took 3 weeks to arrive, and it showed up in a manila envelope. The seller didn't even have the courtesy of writing "do not bend" on it. On the other end, I've also ordered super cheap modern comic books from local sellers that arrived the next day in like a huge box in a Gemini mailer wrapped in bubble wrap inside another box. So you never really know what you're gonna get. Now, the following ways have all happened to me in the past and continue to happen. I understand that packaging can be time consuming, super expensive, and difficult. And you tend to just use the resources and supplies that you have at your disposal. I get it, I've done it myself. But if your main business is selling comic books, then I kind of expect a certain standard in your shipping methods. I mean, no one really wants to receive a damaged comic book, especially if they're paying an arm and a leg for it. So here are some ways in no particular order on how to not package your comic books. With plastic bags, like the kind you put your groceries in. This one's my all-time favorite. And by favorite, I mean like the one I despise the most. It's kind of like saying I don't really care how this comic book ends up in your hands. Now, just to clarify, I'm not talking about a comic book that's in a bag and board and then wrapped in plastic. It's just the raw, naked comic book wrapped in a plastic bag. That's it. Now, there have been a couple variations of this plastic bag wrapping that I've experienced. And the two kinds I've seen the most are the really thin, soft plastic bag and the really thick, crunchy plastic bag. The soft plastic bag is like the one you get like at a liquor store. Like there's no support. Thick plastic bags I'm talking about are like the ones they use now at like Target or Walmart or something. And they're like the heavy duty plastic bags that are meant to carry like 20 pounds of fruit. The worst part about using plastic bags is when they tape it over and over and over again. So now you have just this glob of tape. Now imagine receiving that and then trying to open it. I can't tell you how many times I've spent using an X-Acto knife and just kind of being like a surgeon and just like making sure I don't, puncture the comic book as I'm trying to open this thing. Usually opening a comic book that arrives is supposed to be like kind of therapeutic. But in these instances, it is not. It is like the most stressful thing in the world. No amount of plastic bags will prevent a comic from being bent, punctured, rolled, rubbed, scratched, dented, or folded. Just don't do it with newspaper. You know those things that your parents used to read during breakfast? To me, this is like the second most annoying thing to use when packaging comic books. Okay, maybe these are in like a particular order. Now, in some ways, this is more aggravating just because with plastic bags, at least it's a little durable. It's kind of meant to support something and be some kind of protective layer. But with newspaper, that stuff rips. Newspaper can bunch up and create like a little ball, like a fist that can press against your comic. And worst of all, newspaper has a residue from like the ink. And so that can rub off onto a comic book, especially if this book isn't bag and boarded. Also, when you tape newspaper, it rips super easily. And probably the last thing you want to hear when you're unpackaging or opening a comic book is the sound of paper tearing. I can't think of a more terrifying sound than paper ripping and thinking it's your comic book. Why you do this to me, bro? With tissue. Not even the kind that you stuff in like a gift bag. It's like the kind that you blow your nose with. Achoo! Now imagine for a second opening a box and seeing your comic book nestled in a pile of crumpled tissue. No bag and board, just tissue. Like, you can even use like paper towels, something. For the record, I'm a germaphobe, so I don't even know if these tissues are used like with other comic books. Here's a fun fact for you. Comic books are not packing material. I've seen comic books being used as backing boards for other comic books. I've seen other comic books cut up and then taped together to create a wrapping for another comic book. Don't do it. What's worse is that sometimes they use old ass comic books or magazines as a wrapping for comic books. Now my comic book smells like an old magazine with bags and boards that are not the correct size. Have you ever gotten a comic book that was in a bag and board that it was way too big? Yeah, that's a problem because that comic will slide all over the place. And you can tell because the corners are all blunted. On the other end, haven't you also gotten a comic book that was in a bag and board that you know is way too small for it? I remember I got a Variety magazine, which is huge. It's like 13 by 12. I assume since this seller had a lot of magazines in their inventory that they specialize in this kind of thing. I was wrong. This magazine arrived with 2 pieces of cardboard that were taped together. The problem with that is they used a piece of cardboard that had a fold in it. So you don't use a piece of cardboard that already has a fold in it because then it's gonna bend in that fold. If you look at the spine, you can tell there is a bend in the spine of this magazine right where the fold in the cardboard is. So bags and boards that are way too old. And I know for damn sure that if you are a comic book collector, you've definitely encountered this. I've received comic books that have been in sleeves so long that the back cover has imprinted on the board. It's that because it hasn't been moved or touched in like a decade. The backing board wasn't even white anymore. It was like a sad shade of yellow. Like the edges of this bag weren't even holding its shape. Like they were just kind of like drooping. Like parts of it weren't even transparent anymore. Like you couldn't see through it. It was just like this haze. Older comic books, usually from like the 70s and back, tend to have this musky smell to them. You know, that smell you get right when you open a bag and it just like slaps you in the face. And also, if I ordered a very old comic book from you, please wipe the dust off of it at the very least. Like, I understand most sellers have like these huge inventories of comic books. I get it. And, you know, it might take years before you sell a certain comic book, but can you just do me the courtesy of just wiping that film of dust off? Anyway, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like and subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.